It was a bright Saturday evening in Nakuru, and Amina could barely hide her excitement. Her father, Mr. Baiko, was turning 60, a man who had spent his whole life putting others first. As a retired teacher, he had sold part of his land and gone without many comforts just to educate his children. Amina, now 28 and running her own small but thriving business, had never forgotten those sacrifices. This year, she wanted to give him something he'd only ever dreamed of, a brand new Toyota Hilux truck. She planned everything down to the smallest detail. The family dinner was set at one of the best restaurants in town, with soft music, warm lights, and a big red bow waiting outside on the shiny silver truck. Her mother, Grace, looked radiant, whispering, "Your father won't believe this." But her brothers, Cato and Brian, weren't smiling much. They exchanged tense looks, sipping their drinks quietly, as if something about the celebration bothered them. When Mr. Baiko finally walked in, the whole family stood to sing happy birthday. But it was the sight outside, the Hilux gleaming under the restaurant lights, that left him speechless. His hands trembled as Amina handed him the keys. For a moment, he just stared, then pulled her into a tight hug. His eyes were wet when he whispered, "You've made your old man proud, my daughter." Everyone clapped and cheered as they sat down for dinner. Laughter filled the air, until Baiko raised his glass, smiled warmly, and began to speak. What he said next made the entire table fall silent. The restaurant had been full of laughter a few minutes ago, but now it was so quiet you could hear the soft clinking of glasses. Mr. Baiko stood up slowly, holding his drink, his face glowing with emotion. Everyone turned toward him, waiting for his words. He cleared his throat and said, "I never thought I'd say this, but the daughter I once doubted has done what my sons never could." For a second, nobody moved. Amina froze, her smile fading. Across the table, Cato's jaw tightened, and Brian's hand gripped his glass so hard it shook. Then, with a loud thud, he slammed it down, startling the guests at the next table. Grace, ever the peacemaker, reached for her husband's arm, but Baiko continued, his voice proud and strong. "This truck," he said, nodding toward the window where the shiny Hilux sat, "isn't just a gift. It's proof that hard work pays off. Amina, you are my pride." Amina felt her heart swell and ache at the same time. She loved her father deeply, but she could see the anger rising in her brother's eyes. Grace clapped cheerfully, trying to lighten the mood, but the tension was already too heavy. Cato pushed his chair back abruptly, the sound scraping across the floor. Brian followed, muttering something under his breath. Without another word, they both walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind half-eaten food and stunned silence. Amina sat frozen, her hands trembling under the table. Her father tried to continue with a toast, but the joy had drained from the room. The other guests began to whisper, unsure whether to clap or look away. Grace forced a smile, saying softly, "Let's just eat, please." But even she looked uneasy. Amina glanced out the window and saw her brothers standing by the parking lot, their silhouettes tense under the dim streetlight. Her stomach twisted with guilt. She hadn't meant for this to happen. The gift was supposed to bring the family closer, not tear them apart. Her father reached over and squeezed her hand. "Don't worry about them," he said quietly. "They'll understand one day." But Amina wasn't so sure. Deep down, she could feel something shifting, something she couldn't control. The words her father had spoken would not be forgotten easily. Pride had been wounded, jealousy stirred, and old insecurities had been brought to the surface. When she finally stepped outside later that night, the air was cool and still. The truck gleamed under the streetlights, but it no longer felt like a symbol of joy. Instead, it carried the weight of a new tension she didn't know how to fix. As she stood there, staring at the gift she'd hoped would heal her family, Amina realized one thing. This night had changed everything. The morning after the birthday dinner, Amina woke up feeling uneasy. The night kept replaying in her mind, her father's proud words, her brother's angry faces, the way they stormed out. Before she could shake off the feeling, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Cato. "You think money makes you better than us?" Her heart sank. She read the text over and over, unsure how to reply. Before she could type a response, another message came in. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone." Amina set the phone down, tears stinging her eyes. That wasn't her intention at all. She had only wanted to thank her father for everything he'd done, not to compete or prove a point. By noon, the whispers had already started. A cousin called to check in, but spent more time hinting that people were saying Amina was showing off. At the market, one of her father's old friends joked, Your daughter is rich now, eh? Maybe she'll buy us cars too." It was meant lightly, but Amina could feel the judgment underneath. Later that evening, her mother called. Grace spoke softly, almost apologetically. "Amina, your brothers are hurt," she said. "Maybe you should have kept the gift smaller. They feel humiliated." Amina couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Mama, it was for Dad. He deserved it," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't do it to make anyone feel bad." I know, my dear, Grace sighed. But your brothers don't see it that way. Amina hung up feeling crushed. The very thing she had done out of love was tearing her family apart. She tried to call Cato, but he didn't answer. Brian had already blocked her on social media. 2 days later, things got worse. Cato showed up at their father's house, his anger boiling over. Neighbors could hear the shouting from the gate. You always loved her more, he yelled. She buys you a car, and suddenly she's the golden child. Mr. Baiko, usually calm and patient, tried to reason with him. Cato, that's not true. You're all my children. But Cato wouldn't stop. Then why did you say that nonsense at the restaurant? Why humiliate us? Something inside Baiko snapped. His voice rose. Something Amina hadn't heard in years. Because she stood by me when no one else did, he shouted. The words hung in the air like thunder. Cato went silent, his face pale with shock. Without another word, he turned and stormed off, slamming the gate behind him. Amina heard about the confrontation later from her mother. She sat on her bed that night, numb, realizing how quickly things had spiraled out of control. All she'd wanted was to make her father smile. But now, her family was breaking apart, and she didn't know how to put it back together. Weeks passed, but the tension in Amina's family only grew worse. Her brothers stopped calling, stopped visiting, and wouldn't even look at her when they crossed paths at church. The silence between them was heavy, the kind that fills a room even when no one is there. Her father tried to act as if everything was fine, but Amina could see the sadness in his eyes. Whenever Mr. Baiko drove the shiny Toyota Hilux around town, people would wave and smile. Baiko, you're living large now, some would say. But others whispered behind his back, saying the gift had brought trouble to the family. Amina heard it all, in the market, at the salon, even from old family friends. The truck, once a symbol of gratitude, had become a topic of gossip. Still, Amina refused to stay away. Every weekend she visited her father's house, bringing groceries, fixing little things around the compound, and keeping him company. Grace always welcomed her warmly, though her eyes often looked tired. You know your father worries about your brothers, she would say. Amina just nodded, trying to keep the peace, even as her heart ached. Then one sunny afternoon, Amina drove up the familiar dirt road to her father's home and immediately noticed something strange. The truck wasn't there. She parked her car and walked around the yard, confused. Dad, where's the Hilux? She asked when she found him sitting on the porch, sipping tea. He hesitated before answering. Cato borrowed it, he said quietly. He said he needed to run some errands. He hasn't brought it back yet. Amina's face tightened. Borrowed it? Without even asking me. Her father sighed, setting his cup down. He's still my son, Amina. Maybe he just wants to feel included again. Let's not make it a fight. Amina wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. She could tell her father was trying to hold his family together in the only way he knew how, through patience. So she nodded, though her stomach twisted with frustration. That night, Amina was lying in bed scrolling through her phone when her screen lit up with a WhatsApp message. It was from an unknown number. She opened it, and her breath caught. It was a photo of the truck, flipped on its side, the front smashed and headlights shattered. Dust and broken glass surrounded it like a scene from a nightmare. Her hands shook as she called her father. Dad, have you seen this picture? There was a long silence before he answered, his voice trembling. Yes. Cato had an accident. He's okay, thank God. But the truck, his voice broke. It's gone. Amina sat in the dark, staring at the picture, tears welling in her eyes. The gift that had once meant love, gratitude, and pride had now become the very thing pulling her family apart. When Amina saw the photo of the wrecked truck, her heart nearly stopped. She didn't even think. She just grabbed her car keys and rushed to the hospital, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The whole drive there, her mind was spinning. Please let Cato be okay. Please let Dad not find out before I get there. When she arrived, she spotted her mother and father standing in the corridor. Grace was crying quietly, while Baiko just stared blankly at the floor, his hands clasped tightly together. Where is he? Amina asked breathlessly. In the ward, Grace whispered. He's fine, just bruises. Amina hurried inside, expecting to find her brother remorseful, maybe even embarrassed. But when she saw Cato sitting up in bed, scrolling through his phone, her relief quickly turned to confusion. Cato, what happened? She asked softly. He looked up, shrugged, and gave a half-smile that made her stomach twist. Relax, I'm fine. You should be thanking me. At least I didn't die. Amina blinked in disbelief. The truck is gone, Cato. That car meant everything to Dad. He leaned back, smirking. If you hadn't made such a big scene at that party, maybe this wouldn't have happened. You turned everything into a show. For a moment, Amina couldn't speak. She just stared at him, trying to understand how her own brother could say something so cruel. You took something that wasn't yours, she said quietly, her voice trembling. And instead of saying sorry, you're blaming me? Cato looked away, muttering, You always think you're the hero. Their father stepped into the room then, his face pale and tired. He looked at the broken window beside Cato's bed, then at his son. "That truck," he said softly, "was never about the car." His voice cracked. It was about what it meant. Cato didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, jaw tight. The silence stretched between them until Grace gently took Biko's arm and led him outside. Later, as Amina helped her mother with paperwork, she overheard Brian talking on the phone in the hallway. "She bought it just to show off," he was saying, "to prove she's better than us." Amina froze. So it had begun, the rumors, the twisting of her intentions. Within days, relatives would be whispering again. People would say Amina was trying to buy her father's love, that her brothers were the real victim. That night, sitting by her father's bedside, Amina stayed quiet. Biko looked older, smaller somehow, his hands clasped tightly as if holding on to something invisible. "Don't worry, Dad," she whispered. "We'll fix this." But deep inside, Amina knew something had broken beyond repair. Not the truck, but the fragile bond between her and her brothers. For now, she decided to stay silent. Sometimes silence was the only way to survive a storm. A few weeks after the crash, Amina was still trying to sort out the insurance paperwork for the destroyed truck. It was a long, stressful process, endless forms, phone calls, and meetings. One afternoon, she went to the county land office to confirm her father's property document, since the insurance company needed proof of ownership. What she found there stopped her cold. The clerk handed her a file with her father's name on it. Amina flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing as she scanned the details. Then her eyes landed on something that made her heart pound. The land title had been transferred months ago. The owner's name was no longer just Mr. Biko. Someone had changed it. And the signature at the bottom? It wasn't her father's. It was Brian's. Amina blinked, thinking it had to be a mistake. "Are you sure this is correct?" she asked the clerk. He nodded calmly. "Yes, ma'am." The documents were processed in March. Signed by Mr. Brian Biko, as authorized representative. She left the office with her mind spinning. Why would Brian have her father's land title? And how had her father authorized something he clearly knew nothing about? That evening, she went straight to her father's house, clutching the copies in her hand. "Dad," she said quietly as she walked in, "did you sign any land documents recently?" Her father looked confused. "Land documents?" "No, wait." He rubbed his forehead, trying to remember. "Brian did bring me some papers a while ago. He said they were for updating records at the bank. I didn't read them closely. My eyes aren't what they used to be." Amina felt her chest tighten. "Dad," she whispered, handing him the papers, "these aren't bank forms. You signed over the land." Biko stared at the documents, his face slowly falling as realization hit him. "Oh my God," he murmured. "What have they done?" Amina didn't sleep that night. She stayed up, calling contacts, digging through public records, and piecing everything together. What she discovered broke her heart. Her brothers, Cato and Brian, had secretly used their father's land as collateral for a loan. They had tried to start a business together, but it failed months ago. Now, the land was still under mortgage, and they were in deep debt. Suddenly, everything made sense. The anger, the jealousy, the way they had turned her gift into a weapon. The truck wasn't the real issue. It was guilt. They had been terrified that Amina, the one who kept her life in order, would find out what they'd done. The birthday party, the arguments, even the crash, it had all been building toward this hidden truth. Amina sat quietly at her father's dining table, staring at the documents spread before. The men she loved most had betrayed both her and their father. For the first time, she wasn't angry. She just felt tired. Tired of fighting battles she didn't start. Tired of being blamed for caring too much. She folded the papers carefully and whispered to herself, "Now I know why they hated that truck so much." It wasn't jealousy, it was fear. After learning the truth about the land, Amina didn't tell anyone, not even her mother. She felt betrayed, yes, but she also understood that exploding in anger would only make things worse. Her brothers had already caused enough pain. So instead of confronting them, she decided to fix things quietly, in her own way. She started by visiting the bank that held the mortgage. The officer there confirmed everything. Cato and Brian had borrowed a large sum against their father's land, and the loan was close to default. If no payment was made soon, they risked losing the property completely. Amina listened carefully, nodded, and asked how much was needed to clear the debt. It was a painful amount, money she had been saving to expand her business. But as she stared at the documents, she made up her mind. "I'll settle it," she said firmly. Over the next few days, she quietly paid off the entire mortgage. When the bank finally released the land title, Amina personally went to collect it and had it transferred back into her father's. When she left the office holding the folder, she felt a weight lift off her chest. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about protecting the man who had sacrificed everything for his children. A week later, she surprised her father again, but this time there were no cameras, no crowd, no fancy restaurant. just the two of them at home. In the driveway sat a smaller, simple pickup, nothing flashy, just practical and reliable. When her father stepped outside and saw it, he froze. "Amina again," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "This one's not a show," she said softly, handing him the keys. "It's just something to make your life easier." Baiko hugged her tightly, tears filling his eyes. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she smiled. "That's why I wanted to." The following Sunday at church, something unexpected happened. During the service, the pastor stood up after the sermon and said, "Today we thank the quiet giver who restored what was taken. God bless the one who gives without pride." The congregation murmured. Everyone in town had heard the rumors, and everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Amina sat in the back pew, her head bowed, trying to hide her face. Her father smiled gently beside her, pride shining through his tears. Across the room, her brothers sat stiffly, eyes downcast. For the first time, they seemed truly ashamed. Cato avoided looking at her, and Brian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They both knew what she had done, and that she had done it not to boast, but to heal. As the choir began to sing, Amina closed her eyes. For the first time in months, her heart felt calm. She didn't need recognition or applause. Her peace came from knowing she had done the right thing, quietly, gracefully, and with love. Several quiet months passed after everything settled down. The family barely spoke, but time slowly softened the tension. Then one afternoon, Amina's phone buzzed with a message from her father. "Family dinner. This Sunday. At home." Just that. No explanation, no detail. Amina hesitated at first. The last family dinner had ended in heartbreak, and she wasn't sure she was ready for another round of awkward silence. Still, she couldn't say no to her father. So on Sunday evening, she drove to the old family home, carrying a basket of food and a cautious smile. When she arrived, the smell of Grace's cooking filled the air. Chapati, stew, roasted chicken, and pulao. The dining table was set simply but beautifully. There were no guests, no decorations, no waiters, just the family. Cato and Brian were already there, quiet and tense. They gave her small, uncertain nods when she walked in. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Dinner began with polite conversation. Grace kept the mood light, talking about the neighbors and church events. Every now and then, she'd throw Amina a reassuring glance. Even Baiko looked different, calm, older, and more peaceful. The bitterness that once clouded his eyes seemed to have lifted. After everyone had eaten, Baiko stood slowly and raised his glass. The room went silent, just like the last time, but this time the energy was different. He looked around the table, taking a deep breath. "The last time I gave a toast," he began, "my words caused pain. I spoke from pride, not wisdom. But tonight, I want to speak from the heart." Cato and Brian shifted in their seats. Amina stared at her plate, her chest tightening. Baiko continued, "We've learned something this year. Wealth isn't about money or cars or land. It's about character. It's about what's in here." He tapped his chest gently. "And character is tested not when life is easy, but when it's hard." He turned to Amina, his eyes warm. "My daughter gave without pride. She gave quietly from love. And my sons," he looked at Cato and Brian, "my sons took without shame. But even so, I still believe we can be family again." For a long moment, no one said a word. The only sound was the faint clinking of cutlery. Then Grace reached across the table and took Biko's hand, tears in her eyes. Cato's lips trembled as he whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry." Brian looked down, wiping his face quickly, pretending it was just sweat. The room was heavy with emotion, but also with relief, the kind that comes when a wound finally starts to heal. Amina felt her throat tighten, but she stayed silent, letting the moment speak for itself. For the first time in months, she saw her family not as broken pieces, but as people trying, awkwardly, painfully, but sincerely, to find their way back to each other. Outside, the night air was calm. Inside, for the first time in a long while, peace began to return to the Baiko home. After the dinner, the air outside felt cool and quiet. Amina stepped out to the porch to breathe, her heart still heavy but calm. The night sky above Nakuru was clear, stars scattered like tiny lanterns. She leaned on the railing, thinking about how far her family had come, and how much pain they'd had to go through to get here. Behind her, she heard footsteps. When she turned, she saw Cato standing there, his hands shoved deep in his pocket. For a moment, he just stood silently, staring at the ground. The proud, loud brother she once knew looked smaller now, humbled. "Amina," he said finally, his voice low and unsteady, "I don't deserve forgiveness." She blinked, unsure what to say. He continued, eyes glistening. "I was jealous. I thought Dad's love was something you could buy, that the truck, the land, everything, it was your way of proving you were better. But I was wrong." Amina's chest tightened. For months she had waited for this. Not revenge, not apology, but truth. She stepped closer, speaking softly. "You don't buy love, Cato," she said. "You earn trust. And once it's broken, it takes time to rebuild." He nodded, swallowing hard. I know. I just want to try. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then Cato reached out awkwardly, as if unsure she'd accept. Amina didn't hesitate. She pulled him into a hug, their first in months. It wasn't perfect or dramatic, but it was real. She could feel his shoulders shaking as he whispered, I'm sorry. From the doorway, Brian watched quietly. His eyes met Amina's, and without saying a word, he joined them. The three siblings stood together in the cool night air, holding on to something fragile but alive, the beginning of forgiveness. Inside, their father and mother sat by the table, listening through the open window. Grace smiled, wiping away a tear, while Biko's lips curved into a quiet, grateful smile. They're finding their way back, he whispered. Later that night, the family sat together in the living room. It was awkward at first, short conversations, nervous laughter, long pauses. But slowly, it began to feel normal again. Biko cracked a joke about how his children were finally growing up, and even Cato laughed. For the first time in a long while, the house was filled with warmth instead of tension. Amina sat back, watching her father and brothers laugh together. Her chest swelled with relief. The pain of the past months was still there, but it no longer felt heavy. Forgiveness had begun its quiet work. As the night grew deeper and the laughter softened, Amina looked around the room, at her family, her father's smile, her brother's laughter, and thought to herself, this is what peace looks like. A year later, the Biko family came together again, this time for Mr. Biko's 61st birthday. The air around the old family home felt lighter, warmer. The wounds from the past had softened into memories, and laughter filled the rooms where silence once lived. The shiny Toyota Hilux still sat under the carport, clean and polished, though it hadn't been driven for months. Biko refused to sell it or repair every dent. It's a reminder, he always said. Some things are better left as lessons than trophies. The dining table was full again, plates of food, bright flowers, and the sound of overlapping voices. Amina sat beside her mother, smiling as Cato helped serve drinks and Brian teased their father about his new reading glasses. The chaos felt perfect, like home had finally found its rhythm again. When everyone was done eating, Biko slowly stood up, his glass in hand. The chatter faded, and he looked around the table with a gentle smile. Last year, he began, I raised my glass for my daughter. He turned toward Amina, his eyes full of pride. This year, I raise it for my family, because we finally found our way back. For a moment, no one said a word. Then Grace started clapping, and everyone joined in, clapping, laughing, even crying a little. Cato wiped his eyes and muttered, I didn't come here to cry, which only made everyone laugh harder. As the sun dipped below the hills of Nakuru, its golden light spilled across the yard. Amina looked at her family, her father's smile, her brother's laughter, her mother's soft eyes, and felt her heart settle. She thought quietly to herself, sometimes love isn't about what you give, it's about what you forgive. And in that moment, she knew their family was finally whole again.